with Italy or France, for example, because Protestants have a more nature, an attitude that is more aimed at not exaggerating, being satisfied with whatever is needed for you to perform your duty as a Christian. So it's really a different a difference that has divided us, seriously divided us. In the Netherlands until I think maybe until the 1980s, when the church still played an important role. We call our society a pillar society, with two pillars, the Catholic pillar and the Protestant pillar, and along those pillars, society was really divided. There were different schools, different sports clubs, different everything had in every village there was a Protestant version and there was a Catholic version. Catholic and Protestant people would not often even marry together, so that's how the division in churches kept us divided, and that's how the church actually also put a kind of like a brand mark on societies, and giving actually stimulating the differences that we can see in Europe in contemporary culture.
Oh, by the way, still now is Catholic and Protestant people cannot get married each other?
No, it's also that it's not true that it was not possible. It just didn't happen much, because people of the Catholic Church would join in. That they would come to Catholic bars and go to Catholic schools, and so they would always socialize with each other and not with people from the other church. Therefore, those interchurch marriages were rather rare. There's nobody in my family who is married to a Protestant.
And the Catholic people are more rich than Protestant people?
No, that's also not true. Actually, I think in general, if you speak very generally, I think Protestant people are more frugal, so they spend less and less extravagant than Catholic people.
I see.
So actually, Netherlands was very rich in the 17th century.
Catholic and for Protestant church is how the donation fees is the same?
Yes.
Donation amount is the same?
You mean... actually, to be honest with you, I don't know exactly what the contribution is in the Protestant church, but if you go really hard, I think it is about, if I'm not mistaken, because I used to work for a very strict Protestant company, Bahn, and I believe my colleagues contributed about 10% of their income to the church.
Exactly, I experienced 10% in the States, yes. 10%
right.
of their revenue.
Right, right. But it's not mandatory, but it's kind of suggested. The Catholic Church has about the same amount.
Mm.
But I don't think there are many people who actually donate that share of their income to the church. The Protestant Church does. There are more. I think there are more fanatic Protestant people than there are Catholic people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not true that Protestant people are not rich. No, actually, in the 17th century, that Netherlands was very rich, and at that time, Protestantism was the dominating religion. Mm-hmm. Before Holland became the Netherlands, it was the dominating religion.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very rich, but also kind of frugal, not displaying our wealth so much.
I see.
the houses that you see in Amsterdam, the beautiful houses you see right now were not built as beautiful houses. They were actually just warehouses along the canal, and later on they were rebuilt to live in and become a more of a luxurious residential building. But it was originally just intended as a warehouse.
Nice.
Okay. So moving on, we're jumping through European history and European culture, but I think it is important to also not ignore World War II and World War I, as they had they were kind of a culmination of wars that have been going on for centuries and centuries. But discussing every war is too much. But World War I and World War II, of course, obviously had a big impact on Europe, and ultimately also resulted in the European Union, as Europe was sick and tired and fed up with wars. So it actually led to the convergence of Europe after centuries of constant warfare. So let's look at
you said converse.
One.
You said converse.
Convergence.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. The convergence. Therewith I mean that basically Europe united
Right.
because they could no longer afford to not. It was irresponsible to keep on fighting and have wars
after World War I.
as we have.
After World War I.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, after World War, actually, it is argued, and I think it's also argued in one of the videos that we will see, that basically World War II was a continuation of World War I. World War I never really ended. There was a peace treaty, but that peace treaty was basically the start of the next war. All right, let's have a look at how complicated things were in Europe before World War I started, and how hot it was. There were a lot of conflicts. Europe was divided, and this ultimately, how did World War I started? Of course, there is a reason, but there is a very much deeper background behind why and how World War II happened. World War I happened, sorry, World War II. Not slowly. Why not?
Oh, you like John Green?
Love him.
No voice.
Sorry, running very smoothly.
Ed, no voice.
Right. I got it. Sorry. I need to take off my earpiece.
Today we're going to talk about World War I. We actually have two videos about World War I. Today we're going to talk about how World War I happened. Next week we're going to talk about why. World War I is a really big deal, especially for those of us who are really interested in like industrialization and nation states and modernity. So usually we don't talk that much about wars, but we're going to make an exception. Mystery, exception to the Mongoltage. Yeah, no, me from the past. We don't roll the Mongoltage every time we use the word exception. We roll it when we're talking about how the Mongols are an exception to a lot of our assumptions about civilizations. Stan, no, there are no Mongols today. We are talking about World War I. So I'm filming this in 2014, which means that the Great War started 100 years ago, and the World War I centenary is just so hot right now, I can't miss out on it. So most historians agree that the event that started World War I was the assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914. But beyond that, there's not a lot of agreement. Others say the war really started after Franz Ferdinand did it, like when Germany declared war or when Russia mobilized. So looking at why a war or any historical event happened means looking for a cause and effect relationship. That implicitly assumes that if one particular event in a chain of events had gone differently, the historical outcome would also be different. This is why we have alternate history novels, right? Like, what would have happened in the American Civil War if the South had won the Battle of Gettysburg? What would have happened if the Nazis had repulsed the D-Day invasion? In both cases, probably eventually the same outcome. But that's neither here nor there. The question we're looking at today is how, and that's a much more modest question because we can simply discuss a series of events, but it's still a complicated one. Because when you're talking about how, you're always picking from an uncountable number of things that happen. You know, a butterfly flaps its wings, and that leads to a series of events, and then eventually across the world, an archduke gets killed. So even when it comes to a relatively straightforward question like how, you'll never get to the bottom of all of it. But today we're going to discuss some of the how. So one way or another, all wars start with a breakdown in peaceful relations between the eventual belligerents, and World War I is no exception. Oh, for the love of agriculture, please stop it. Right, but World War I is a bit unusual in that we have a concrete event and a date to start our discussion. Sometimes we get lucky historically, and there's an invasion that starts a war, like in the Korean conflict, or the firing on Fort Sumter in the American Civil War. But other times it's much more butterfly effecty, with events that might or might not lead to a war building upon each other until one side mobilizes or declares war, or there's a fight over who should not first. But here we have a specific assassination of a specific Archduke, Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. Now, it wasn't a great day for Franz to visit Bosnia, since it was the anniversary of the Serbs' defeat at Kosovo-Polja in 1389, and also St. Vitus's Day, which was a celebration for Slavic nationalists, and a Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip and his co-conspirators chose to celebrate Slavic nationalism by killing Franz Ferdinand. Now, they didn't choose Franz Ferdinand at random. He was the heir apparent of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Franz Ferdinand wasn't particularly well liked, not by his uncle, who was the head of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, certainly not by Bosnian Serb nationalists, also not really by everyone else in Europe, except for the German Kaiser. But Franz Ferdinand was, in his way, kind of a moderate. Oh, it's time for the open letter? Oh, look, it's a collection of my favorite assassinated moderates. It's hard out there for a moderate. An open letter to moderates. Dear moderates. So one of the reasons that Franz Ferdinand's uncle didn't like him that much is that the emperor was really hardcore, whereas Franz Ferdinand, he was kind of a moderate. He was like, I'm an Austro-Hungarian through and through, but I see the Serbian argument. Really, Franz Ferdinand was the one leader in the empire who might have come up with a solution to the problems of Serbian expansion and Bosnian independence. And murdering moderates has the way of making other moderates, more extreme. In short, moderates, your work may not be romantic, it may not appeal to the youth, but it is heroic. Very dangerous. Best wishes, John Green. So even though Franz Ferdinand's uncle didn't particularly like him, as the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, he felt a certain responsibility to, do something. Otherwise, the Serbian nationalists would feel like they could expand their territory at the expense of the empire. So despite what you often hear about World War I being pointless, this makes sense as a point, sort of. Now, it's a bit of schoolyard bully kind of diplomacy, but it does make a certain sense. If Serbia can get bigger than all of the other places, will think that they can have nations too. Soon enough, you don't have an empire. Now, there's still some debate about whether Princip and his fellow assassins acted alone or as part of a larger conspiracy organized by the Serbian government. But the Austrians certainly thought there was broader involvement, which is why the whole thing ended up becoming a war. So Princip was a member of the scary-sounding Black Hand, dedicated to creating a greater Serbia that would include Bosnia. And there's some evidence that the Serbian military intelligence was in on the... Sorry?
Who are they?
Who are they? Who? The Black Hand?
Yeah, from a picture.
Yeah, from... They are a group of nationalists who wanted to expand Serbia and include Bosnia. So expand their territory. So we're looking at the people who were behind the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the Prince of Austria-Hungary.
By the way, assassin person, just from a picture, is he where he from? Bosnia?
The assassinated is Prince Ferdinand. He's from Austria.
Yeah. Who's No. Who are they?
They are Serbs.
Ah,
They are
Serbs.
Serbs, and they are aiming to integrate Bosnia into Serbia.
This is, I think, Japanese people very difficult to understand. Serbs, Bosnia, and also Armenia.
Yes.
The Armenia massacre is very famous, right? This killed by Turkey, Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And those background is started from here, right?
Yeah. So actually, the conflict in former Yugoslavia is also related to the Ottoman conflict. That has to do with the fact that Bosnia is the only part in Europe which has a Muslim majority. So that actually feels that a lot of money and influence is exercised in Bosnia to actually keep an interest, keep basically a landing place for Muslims into Europe. And on the other hand, we had the Serbs who felt that who had like religious differences, but also power interests into controlling Bosnia.
By the way, who killed the emperor?
It was some say it was a terrorist attack, and it was actually a Bosnian.
Bosnian.
Yeah. Who killed him, but it was actually also assumed that the guy did not. It's just a little bit like the JFK assassination. Did he, Lee Harvey Oswald, did he operate by himself, or were there more people involved? Well, the Austrians, the Austro-Hungarians, they really believed that it was not a guy who was operating by himself, but there were people behind this guy who actually planned this assassination to happen, to start the conflict. And it was also a defiance of the influence of Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary wanted to retaliate and go to war.
Retaliate who?
Retaliate for because they believed that actually it was the Black Hand, so not a Bosnian, but Bosnian was just paid by the people in Sarajevo, the Serbs, to assassinate Prince Ferdinand.
Those people like this picture?
Yes.
By the way, do you know the background of Armenia massacre? What's the relationship with Armenia massacre and this incident?
Actually, it is not exactly the same. It is actually different. Armenia was... when did that take place? But that was between the Ottomans and the Armenian nationals. But Armenia is much further more eastward.
At that time, that Armenia, it didn't include it in Austria-Hungary.
So Armenia is actually not part of former Yugoslavia. It's a country that is maybe 1,000 kilometers away from.
Oh, okay, really? I didn't know that. I thought the one of Yugoslavia.
No, Armenia is not.
The Yugoslavia majority people is Serb.
Well, I think maybe Serbs or Croats. I'm not really 100% sure, but Bosnia is a minority.
Bosnia is minority. Okay.
Yeah, but it becomes even more complicated because there are Bosnian Serbs, and so and even today, there is a big riot at the World Cup at the moment because when Switzerland played, who did they play? Switzerland played against Serbia. Two guys who scored a goal made a political movement because they were protesting against the influence of or the militaristic intervention that Serbia has committed against Albania.
Albania.
These two players were born in Albania. Albania and Kosovo. Yeah, it's really complicated in the Balkan.
Yes, that's exactly Balkan, and maybe you are familiar with Balkan, but maybe Takashi and I we don't know about this. We studied, but not easy to understand. So every time, what's
I think it's very difficult for everybody to understand because basically these people, they have been living as neighbors, but they are so much almost in balance in terms of power, and there's so many different countries that are striving for hegemony within that region that a lot of alliances and wars and always originate from the Balkans. And you have the diversity in religion, the diversity in national interests, the lack of stability. So what happened in Yugoslavia, what was really a breakthrough in history, was the founding of Yugoslavia as a country by Tito.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's move on because we try to to explain about a little bit more detail after this video because I think Takahashi might be he does not understand completely what Serbs and also Kosovo and so forth.
The main point of this video is to illustrate how divided and how a lot of long-lasting conflict preceded the World War I. That this was not just an incident that happened, but basically that Europe was deeply divided and had a long history of war and different interests, and a lot of people were challenging the status quo to extend their power at the expense of others within Europe.
Okay, let's
okay,
move.
Yep.
Was a member of the scary-sounding Black Hand, dedicated to creating a greater Serbia that would include Bosnia. And there's some evidence that the Serbian chief of military intelligence was in on the assassination plot, or at least knew about it. In fact, it's likely that the bombs and pistols the assassins used were supplied by a Serbian army officer, but this is still pretty controversial, so much so that people are currently fighting about it in comments. So almost a month after the assassination, on July 23rd, Austria issued an ultimatum to Serbia. And Austria intentionally made the demands so harsh that the Serbs would inevitably have to reject them and ergo war, but that doesn't explain the month-long delay. What happened in that month? Well, Austria's foreign minister, Berchtold, was afraid that if they attacked Serbia, Russia would then attack Austria-Hungary, so the Austrians spent that month talking to their ally Germany to make sure that Germans would have Austria's back. The Austro-Hungarians got assurance on July 5th or July 6th in the form of what has been called the blank check, a promise from Germany that they would help Austria if Russia mobilized. And it was clear that the Germans expected the Austrians to move quickly in response to the assassination, not like wait for another 20 days. So usually I don't care about dates, but at this point the timing becomes pretty important. Let's go to the thought bubble. So when the Serbs received the Austrian ultimatum, Russia declared itself to be in a period preparatory to war, which sounds a lot like mobilization, but technically it wasn't, which Russia's foreign minister emphasized to the Germans. The Tsar approved the measure on July 25th, and it went into effect on July 26th. The Serbs rejected Austria's ultimatum on July 25th, but they made their rejection sound like a capitulation, so the Germans thought that war had been averted, and they were kind of surprised then on July 28th when Austria suddenly declared war on Serbia, even though the Austrian army wasn't actually ready to start fighting. Then, on July 30th, Russia exited its period preparatory to war and actually officially mobilized. Germany warned the Russians to stand down, but 2 days later, on August 1st, France mobilized its armed forces in support of Russia, and that same day, Germany mobilized and declared war on Russia. So if you're keeping score at home, and good historians always do, Austria and Germany were the first to declare war on July 28th and August 1st, respectively, but Russia, with its pre-mobilization mobilization, was actually ready to begin fighting before Serbia rejected Austria's ultimatum. Anyway, then Germany declared war on France on August 3rd, marched through Belgium to invade, hoping to quickly knock out the French and focus on Russia. Sorry, France, but, Russia's a big deal. German troops crossed Belgium's border on August 4th, and the British issued an ultimatum to the Germans telling them to get out of Belgium or else. Germany chose or else, and Britain declared war. So by August 4th, 1914, all the major powers involved in World War I were officially at war with each other.
You get that?
Yeah. How about Takashi? No, I just ask question Takashi. Takashi, do you understand background for this war?
Kind of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Ed, you had better explain a little bit about this. Why the German, Austria-Hungary against the other rest of the world?
Well, okay, so basically what happened is that Austria wanted to retaliate, and that they wanted to attack Serbia, but they were not sure whether they could count on their big brother Germany. So they wanted to have assurance from Germany that actually, if they were to attack and there was to be a retaliation from Russia, then they would stand with Austria-Hungary. Germany gave that point to Austria, but actually Austria didn't really act. So they were more or less like hesitant to actually start a war. They were just making threats and making more and more demands. But in the meantime, Russia already stood with Serbia, and because there was a pact between Russia and France. France had a lot of influence in Russia because of trade between the two countries. So when Austria finally declared war and actually went to war declared war with Serbia, it was already like a month later. But the Russians had already not really mobilized, but officially, but unofficially, they were already at the border. So they were already prepared to attack. Well, Germany, also because there were blood ties between the Austrians and the Austrians and the German royal family, Germany stood with Austria as promised, and they started to invade Belgium in order to attack France because France stood with Russia. So there we had the start of World War I.
Why Russia is relating for Serbia?
Well, they're fellow Slavs.
Oh, Slav.
And Slavic.
Serbia is Slavic. That's the reason why Russia was involved.
Right. And Russia was also not very friendly with Austria-Hungary, which was a major power at the time. The Habsburg Empire.
Who is the first country waged war against Austria-Hungary? Russia?
It was actually Russia. Well, of course, it was Serbia. But Serbia was being supported by Russia. And it was actually, history repeats itself, because it was basically the way it worked with, what's it called?
By the way, at that time, Serbia is a country?
Serbia is a country, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they have been independent always. As you can see here on the map, there's all these different areas. That was already the reality at that time.
So Austria-Hungary waged war against Serbia, followed
Right.
by Russia, and
Right,
then
Russia.
France.
That Germany steps in, that means that actually France is going to the support of Russia, and the war on the west side between France and Germany starts. Then England gets it. Germany invades Belgium. That means that England gets involved, and then we have a world war.
Oh, they invaded Belgium. That's the reason why
Right.
England involved.
Right.
Oh, I see. But at that time, 1914, just after the revolution of Russia.
1917. Just before.
Oh,
Before the revolution. The revolution in Russia was in 1917.
oh, I see. Just before.
Yeah. So it was still under the Tsar.
Oh, I see. Okay, 1917.
So
Okay.
it was also that the Russian Revolution was also the result of the devastating effects of World War One, because the Tsar, there were heavy losses in the Russian army.
I see. Okay.
And so why England was involved?
England was involved
Because of Belgium.
right. England was at the side of France, and when Germany invaded Belgium, that was the start sign for England to also get involved.
England was side of France.
Right. England sided with France and Russia at the other side. But this was very powerful. This has been the Central Europe. Actually, this is an extension of the Roman Empire in the center of Europe. So that was an era that came to an end during World War One. This whole part was the center of power at that time.
Okay, what is the relationship about Ottoman Empire? He is why he just support for Austria-Hungary?
Why? Yeah, they chose the wrong side.
Yeah, why?
They
Ottoman?
were
Huh?
side of why they chose. Well, they were, of course, at the side of Bosnia, and Bosnia was against Serbia, and Serbia was the enemy of Austria-Hungary, therefore the enemy of Germany. So it was in the best interest to protect Bosnia against the Serbs to side with Germany and Austria-Hungary.
But my question is Ottoman Empire.
Yes, Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire is a Muslim empire. The Muslims stood with Bosnia. Bosnia's integrity, Bosnia's country was threatened by the Serbs. The Serbs were supported by Russia, and by France, therefore by France. So it was
Bosnia is Muslim, but Serb is not Muslim.
right.
Okay.
Right. So the Bosnia was kind of like a sphere of influence for the Ottoman Empire.
Okay. So
But
this
they
is
sided
Ottoman
with
Empire
Material.
involvement relating to religion.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Right. So that was the end of that was the final that choice basically sealed the fate of the Ottoman Empire.
I see. Okay.
Right? All the major powers involved in World War I were officially at war with each other. Thanks, Papa. Well, now I know there were a lot of other powers that would get involved later, including the United States, Japan, the Ottoman Empire, even Italy. But for the nations who did most of the actual fighting, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Serbia, France, Great Britain, the war happened both very quickly back, it all happened almost at once. But if you're in the middle of it, a month is a long time. And at any point, someone, like, say, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, could have come in and said, wait a second. Well, I guess not anyone. But that's how an act of terrorism in a Bosnian city turned into the first major European war of the 20th century, a war that still resonates today. Now, the Austrians and the Serbs probably both imagined that the war could stay localized to the Balkans, especially since there had been previous conflicts in the region that hadn't blown up into a world war. You know, like in 1908, and 1912, and 1913. We'll get into what made 1914 different next week. The whys, of course, will always be very complicated, but for now, please remember that we are always in the middle of a how. Those living in June and July of 1914 could never have imagined how significant that month would be for human history. And when thinking about them, it's worth remembering that we also can't imagine what our decisions today will mean in 100 years. Thanks for watching. Crash Course is filmed here in...
So are you going to show second one?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So it was very, very messy. This was pent-up pressure that had already existed for a long time. It was like basically Europe was so complicated, and there were so many interests, local interests, that basically this was a very unstable situation that culminated through pacts and family ties, culminated in war.
By the way, Hungary is still close to Germany?
Hungary, no. At the moment?
No.
Well, at the moment I don't, well...
Because at that time, Austria-Hungary is one imperial state, right? So
yes.
They have a strong relationship, Austria-Hungary and Germany, right?
Right.
But not now. Why they have a close relationship with Austria-Hungary? The same, different ethnics, right?
Right. I think that there were bloodlines within the royal families of those two countries.
Oh, royal families, but not anymore.
Right. Not anymore. No. No. The royal family doesn't play a role there anymore.
So,
and well, Hungarian actually, like if you look ethnically, Hungarians are very different from Austrians, but not really on the outside. But I remember that we were talking about negotiations of Hungarians, and they are very, very, very different from Germans when it comes to negotiation and negotiation style and culture. Hungarians are super sentimental, highly sensitive, very emotional as compared to the Germans.
Really, looks like a Palestine.
Right. So that is the melancholy of the Austrians and the temperament and their sometimes seemingly irrational behavior is very much different from the German, like linear, active, completely logic approach when it comes to making and brokering deals. I cannot imagine that that was on a work level. That was a very good combination between Hungary and Austria.
So, which one is killed the emperor? Which one, Hungarian?
No, the Hungarians didn't. No, the Hungarians were basically, they were just part of Austria-Hungarian Empire. There was no problem there. No, it was the Serbs who killed the Franz Ferdinand.
No. Which one is killed the emperor? Austrian? Hungarian?
It was actually a prince. It was not the empire. It was a prince who visited Bosnia who was killed.
They are
Sarajevo.
from Bosnia. This is they killed the emperor is not Austria-Hungary. Cheese come from Serb?
No, so it was the Prince of Austria-Hungary, who visited Franz Ferdinand, who visited Sarajevo. But then he was
Sarajevo is
assassinated.
capital of Serbia.
Yes, Sarajevo.
Okay. This prince. Just my question is, prince is which ethnic person is Hungarian or Australian?
It was Austrian.
Okay. And my basic question is, currently Hungary is prime minister is Orban. So Orban
Right.
is very different from German people nationality or Australian people, right?
Right.
Hungary is different.
Hungary is different. Hungary is a remarkable country. It's a small country, doesn't have a large population, but it has been very influential actually because it's a hub between the east and the west. Hungarian culture is very sophisticated. They have actually produced a lot of scientists, excellent scientists. So it's kind of a remarkable country, but it's also a country of extremes. There are also a lot of illiterate farmers in Hungary. So there is a big gap between Budapest, the city, and the countryside. I personally know some Hungarians, and to my surprise, they're always very critical about their country and about how backward and illiterate they are. I thought they were more sophisticated, but apparently there is a big gap there. But that's also, I think, that has been exacerbated within the communist era. It has changed the people of Hungary, I assume. Also, Hungary has a lot of gypsies and things like that, right?
Oh, the gypsy came from Hungary.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So how did World War I started? That's the question here. It was a combination of facts and pent-up wars and influences, and that basically culminated into a large-scale war. Okay, then.
By the way, your microphone has some noise.
Yeah. So I noticed that too.
Okay, not now.
Okay. Let's go to the video.
Okay, go ahead.
This is Crash Course World History, and today we continue our discussion of how a regional conflict became World War I. We're also going to look at who started the war, and although no one nation is truly to blame, some nations are more to blame than others. Like America, for once, blameless. Largely blameless. Mr. Green, that's easy. The Germans started the war. Well, even past as it happens, many historians and British politicians would agree with you. I mean, you have an opinion that can be defended, and I can't wait for you to defend it. Maybe they just really liked war. I'm not really in the defending positions business, Mr. Green. I'm more in the bold proclamations business. Yes, as noted. But it turns out there's more to like than that. So the topic of who started World War I remains one of the most controversial and interesting topics to discuss in world history, not least because, we like to avoid having another one. But in general, when we talk about world wars, as when we talk about World Cups, we quickly end up discussing Germany. The idea that the root cause of World War I was Germany, or more specifically German militarism, continues to be popular. This has been the case ever since the 1960s, with this historian, Fritz Fischer, identifying Germany as the chief cause of the war. But Germany's guilt for the war was also written into the Versailles Peace Treaty in Article 231, and most of you will be familiar with the idea that anger over that clause and its deaths helped lead to Hitler's rise. It's also pretty much however you slice it, Germany was definitely responsible for starting World War II, and looking back, that made it more plausible that they would also have started World War I, because, they had a history of starting wars. To be fair, the definition of a Western European nation has a history starting wars. Unless you're the Swiss. Cue the Switzerreal stand.
I don't understand why he showed Hitler.
Sorry.
Why he showed the Hitler picture?
So basically, what they are discussing, he's discussing. Okay, so who was responsible for starting World War I? And so he was discussing the how to defend the thesis that Germany was responsible for starting World War I. And so basically, you can say that Germany was started World War II. They were the reason they did it. But actually, the reason why World War II started can also be led back to World War I and the aftermath of World War I, when the peace treaty put such a heavy burden on Germany that they were almost certain to revolt against the penalties that were imposed on World War I, and therefore it was more not really Germany who started, but it was more the result of the peace treaty that was drafted up by France and England that started World War II, and therefore to say that Germany had in general, but that's what a lot of people believe, that Germany has a history of starting a war. Is not exactly true, because basically World War II was started by Germany, but had its roots actually in the peace treaty, and therefore blaming Germany for World War II and then putting that also into who caused World War I is not exactly fair.
Okay.
Authoritarianism to entire national populations is a little problematic. Also, one nation's militarism is another nation's strong national defense, and when you live in the country, as I do, that spends more on defense than any other nation, it's probably not that good of an idea to call it militaristic. There's just something about that broad brush painting of an entire nation sharing a particular characteristic that feels a little bit propagandic. Also, it wasn't just Germans who were militaristic in 1914. The idea of the glory of war was a very popular concept all over Europe. And really, there's no evidence that the German people of 1914 were any more or less militaristic than the French or the Russians. They all had poetry that celebrated heroic sacrifice and dying for the mother and or fatherland. But there's another problem with the whole idea that the Germans were more eager for war than anyone else in Europe. That argument relies a lot on the behavior of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the German leader, and the Kaiser did make some pretty bellicose and stupid public statements, which in turn made people fear that Germans were eager for war. So Wilhelm became kind of a stand-in for German aggression, a literal cartoon villain upon whom the world, especially the English, could project their stereotypes. So I would argue that the German character isn't to blame for World War I, and in fact, no national character has ever been to blame for anything. But I'm not going to let the Germans off the hook entirely. So you'll remember that Germany offered the so-called blank check, that Germans would always support Austro-Hungarian's ultimatum to Serbia. And in some ways, this empowering by Germany's support encouraged Austria's foreign minister Bechtold to behave as recklessly as possible under the mistaken impression that this is what the Germans wanted him to do. So basically, Austria thought that Germany wanted a war, so they were like, oh, we'll just behave really recklessly, and we'll give the Germans the war they've been so excited about. But the Germans were offering the Austrians the assurance of support in the hopes that it wouldn't lead to war. So you could argue that, in fact, most of the blame for starting World War I should fall on the shoulders of the Austrians. After all, they were the ones who issued the ultimatum to Serbia, and they were the first to declare war, although only against Serbia. But the Germans were the first to declare war on a major power, Russia, on August 1st, and the German advance in France and Belgium is what brought Britain into the war. And those are pretty solid arguments that Germany turned the conflict from, a regional thing in the Balkans isn't unprecedented to like this big pan-European war. But I don't think we're done assigning blame, because we didn't just have a pan-European war, we had a world war. Russia. Now you remember that of all the major powers, Russia was the first to mobilize its massive army, and it was Russia's mobilization that threw Germany, France, and Britain into the war. I'm just trying to die! It's so scary, man. I'm just trying to talk about history. I'm not talking about any current conflicts, and it makes me nervous to say this, but there was really no good reason for Russia to mobilize in the first place. I mean, when Austria declared war on Serbia on July 28th, the Austrians could not mobilize their own troops for 2 weeks because they were on a harvest break. I mean, if we learned anything about agriculture, then it's hard to have a large-scale war without it. No, we can't go to war until all the wheat has been farmed. But even if Austria had mobilized and attacked immediately, their initial plan was an attack on Belgrade, not Russia, which, by the way, was called somewhat confusingly Plan B. Now, Vienna did have a plan to mobilize against both Serbia and Russia, but they never used it. But even if Austria had launched an all-out attack on Russia, Russia had begun its pre-mobilization period preparatory to war on July 25th. Well, I usually don't care about dates, but the start of World War I, very important, because July 25th was before the Serbs had even responded to the Austrian ultimatum. And just as a general rule, it's hard to play the blameless victim moving all of your troops to the border. Hey, why are you here again, Putin? So here we have Austrians and Germans receiving reports of Russian troops massing on their borders, and, that seems kind of like war. A lot of it comes down to how you understand Russia's period preparatory to war. I mean, focus on the period preparatory, or do you focus on the to war? Regardless, on July 30th, Russia became the first power to actually put its war machine into motion. Let's go to the thought bubble. So talking about Russia leads us towards some of the more meta arguments about the causes of World War I, because it's difficult to understand what Russia was doing when it mobilized without trying to understand why they mobilized. After all, an Austrian attack on Serbia was hardly an existential threat to Russia. I mean, look at the map. Russia's huge, and at the time probably had the largest army in Europe, if not the world. So why would they care about what was likely to be a skirmish on the Bosnian border? Well, here's where geopolitics and history come in. So looking at the map, you can see that the Balkans are right next to the Dardanelles, the straits that give access to the Black Sea. Russia needed to maintain influence there in order to ensure traffic through those straits, especially if the Ottomans were going to form an alliance with the Germans, which they did. Also, at least in its own estimation, Russia was in danger of becoming a laughing stock in European politics. Their humiliating loss to Japan in the Japanese War was followed by Russia's inability to stop Austria from annexing Bosnia from the Ottomans in 1908, and that was the event that sparked Serbia's drive to expand its own territory. Its history of prior weakness meant that Russia's foreign policy makers feared that without some decisive action, Russia wouldn't be taken seriously anymore. In the wake of Austria's ultimatum, Russian Foreign Minister Sazonov concluded that Russia, quote, could not remain a passive spectator whilst the Slavonic people was being trampled down. If Russia failed to fulfill her historic mission, she would be considered a decadent state and would henceforth have to take second place among the powers. If, at this critical juncture, the Serbs were abandoned to their fate, Russian prestige in the Balkans would collapse utterly. So, judging from what we just learned in the thought,
Oh, wait a minute.
If they could have just stopped
What he said?
annexing Bosnia in the first.
What he said? What I couldn't follow that sentence. What is written in the context of this sentence?
Russia had suffered a defeat against Japan, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of like it's like when it was compared at that in the world as David defeated Goliath, and Russia felt a little bit humiliated about that loss against Japan. So they felt, one thing is that they felt that they needed to reestablish their prestige. Another thing is that they had an economic interest, because they were afraid that if this conflict were to expand into the Ottoman Empire, then their access from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean would be blocked by the Ottomans and the Balkan, and Russia would not be able to use that strait anymore for their trade. So they basically felt, okay, they wanted to reestablish their prestige and they wanted to protect their economic interest in the Mediterranean, and therefore they mobilized their troops and were eager to support the Serbs against Austria-Hungary.
So at that time, Russia, they are very keen for the business in Mediterranean area. So that reason he supported Serbia.
That was their geopolitical interests, that their economic interest basically, that partly drove their interest to support their Slavic brothers, as they call it.
But why that? How about the relationship about Ottoman Empire and Russia?
That was not good. Russia didn't have a good relationship with the Ottoman Empire.
But this is at that war, both countries the same side, right?
No, because the Ottoman Empire.
Oh yeah, Ottoman Empire is Austria-Hungary side.
Yes.
I see. Okay, I got it. Okay.
How this would have happened, and if I may go a little further back, there wouldn't have even been an Ottoman Empire without the stupid Romans. And of course, the Roman Empire was largely dependent on constant expansion and looting. So if only the Gauls could have defeated Caesar, none of this would have happened. In short, no wonder Caesar was assassinated. He was about to start World War I in 1900. I bring that up because that's the tricky thing about the blame game. You can trace the causes of World War I back a bunch of ways. I mean, I can't think of anyone who can't at least partially assign blame to. Well, actually, you know what? If they just kept control of Russia, probably no World War I. Anyway, all of this only scratches the surface of the arguments about who's to blame for World War I. I mean, stuff like the alliance system or European imperialism, where you often hear about the naval rivalry between Britain and Germany. And then there are the ideological causes like social Darwinist thinking that led people to believe that war was a natural and inevitable state of human affairs. You can tell all those origin stories of the Great War, and they're important, but ours centers on diplomatic history. There are a few reasons for this. First, the decision to go to war was ultimately in the hands of a very small group of diplomats. I mean, even in the most democratic countries, Britain and France, popular opinion didn't force mobilization. Also, in most countries, that's still the case. It's still diplomats who decide whether to go to war. So understanding what makes governments and diplomats decide to go to war is very important. But looking at the diplomatic causes of the war also reveals something to us about the pitfalls of writing history. I mean, diplomats are famous for keeping pretty detailed records of their dealings, both at the time and in retrospect, and historians have to sift through sources and make choices about which ones to emphasize, and sometimes even which ones to believe, because of course often these sources are in direct conflict. Now, I'm no historian, but in creating this episode, we had to make choices that many of you will disagree with, either because you don't think we gave enough evidence, or you don't like the things that we emphasized, and that's great. It's these constructive and critical conversations that lead us to dig deeper, to consult primary sources, to read more broadly, and that leads to a rich understanding of the world and a more engaged life. All that with the alliance is certainly important, and I'm sure we'll be discussing it in the classes and in comments. Thank you for watching.
So this is the end of World War I?
Actually, there is one more thing that I would like to look at, and that has to do with the family ties within the royal families in Europe. So actually, the German Empire, the German Empire, Kaiser Wilhelm, and was related to the Tsar. Was full cousin of the Tsar. There was also a blood relationship. Another cousin was the Emperor of Germany, and England also was a full cousin.
Oh, you're
And
talking
actually,
about the Tsar is Russian Tsar? Tsar is Russian Tsar?
yes,
German
they were all cousins.
Wilhelm is the family with the family of Russian Tsar?
Yes.
Oh, why they started to wage war?
Well, they didn't particularly like each other.
They didn't
And
like.
especially Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany was rather a bully who loved to offend his cousins.
Cousin is the Tsar of Russia?
Yeah,
Oh. Why they just a kind of family conflict they have?
well, basically because well, I think in this article here, in the New Yorker. So first cousin, King George of England, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas of Russia. They were first cousins. That
Also,
happened.
they had a relationship with England.
Yes. Yes. So the royal families had blood ties between those, and that was very common. Like the royal families within Europe, the royal houses, they were to marry to strengthen the ties between countries.
I didn't know that. So England, Germany, and Russia is a
Right.
royal family,
Yeah. So they had blood ties between them.
and France is the same.
Right.
How about Austria, Hungary?
So the King George, England, France, not France, by the way, England, Germany, and Russia were first cousins.
But France is also the family of Russia.
France was that a family member? I don't know.
Yeah,
At that
I remember, but I don't know the detail. But France, Russia has some relationship they had before. How about Austria, Hungary?
Well, I think Austria-Hungary had blood ties with the French royal family, but that maybe dated back a little bit further. That was the Napoleon married to a royal family member, I think, who came from Austria.
Oh, I see. Okay. So all Europe is have their royal family group.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
okay. Still now is they have some influence each other.
Well, I think there may be some blood ties, but actually the royal families have very little influence in Europe today. They are more that it's like a full-blown democracy right now. So officially they have the right of approval, but they have no political power. So the royal families and their relationships. First of all, they date back because they are now engaging in marriages outside royal families. So they don't necessarily marry with princes or princesses of other countries, but they just marry with citizens of their own people, or internationally even. So those family ties, they have been watered down over the generations. And what's more, actually the influence of royal families has decreased significantly.
Okay. Oh, just you write down, written down. This is you said King George.
So this is a quote from the New Yorker who writes it's a magazine. The New Yorker writes about the family ties and specifically about Kaiser Wilhelm. So I quote from that article: "If international conflict is around the corner, it would seem that you really don't want a narcissist in control of global power. Wilhelm's touchiness, his unpredictability, his need to be acknowledged, these things
struck a chord with elements in Germany, which was in kind of an adolescent spasm, quick to perceive slights, excited by the idea of flexing his muscles, filled with a sense of entitlement. At the same time, Wilhelm's posturing raised tensions in Europe. His clumsy personal diplomacy created suspicion. His alliance with the Apostolic Rite and his slavish admiration for the army inched the country closer and closer to war. So it was actually the fact that Kaiser Wilhelm was not very smart. He was very undiplomatic. He really believed himself to be a very smart and a very smart person, but actually what he really did is basically mimic the opinion of the last person he spoke to, and whatever, if somebody would be in complete contradiction of that opinion, would talk to him next, then he would express that same opinion as his own. So he didn't have any ideas by himself. He was just not very smart and not very nice person. Mm-hmm. And he was used by politicians, policy advisors, diplomats, to actually maneuver Germany into the position that they actually went to war. Mm-hmm. So there were close connections. There were also, like Wilhelm famously also, he actually drove his cousin, the Tsar. He had a deal. He was going to broker a deal with the Tsar about weapons, but then he offended the Tsar in a way that the Tsar actually moved away from Germany and purchased weapons from France. So it was actually through the influence of Kaiser Wilhelm that Russia strengthened the ties with France, and that also contributed to the start of World War I.
What do you mean contribute? You said France and Wilhelm is relationships not bad with France and Russia, right?
France and no. France and Germany were not in a good relationship.
But you said Wilhelm sold the weapon to France?
Wilhelm sold weapons to Russia, or he wanted to sell weapons to Russia.
Oh, sell the weapon to Russia. Okay.
Right. But because he offended the Tsar gave the weapon deal to France instead.
Oh, Russia gave the two weapons to France.
Right.
Complicated.
Very complicated. So we see all these family ties within the royal family, who was very influential at that time. We see the interest of countries, the role of alliances. Everybody has its own tie. So it was very messy, and it culminated into an all-out war, and with everybody with his own interests.
By the way, Wilhelm is when he disappeared before World War II. Why did he disappear instead of Hitler?
He had to flee the country.
What?
He fled to the Netherlands.
Oh, really?
Yes.
After World War I?
Yeah. He fled to the Netherlands and he stayed in Doorn, which is the village where I lived for a long time. Oh, he had a palace there.
Really?
And so now there is a restaurant in that garden, and I worked there for a long time.
Really? His ancestor?
No, actually, his ancestors. He doesn't have any ancestors anymore. I think he's the last in line of that royal family. So basically, that came to an end. He lived in Doorn and died there, and he's buried now in his own garden. and they have a restaurant there. And I used to do baito every weekend.
Interesting.
So history comes gets closer and closer.
Okay.
But he played an important role. He played an important role in creating tensions within Europe, and he divided people as he loved to humiliate other emperors, and thereby alienating friends and made them into enemies.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you going to show another one?
Let's move on to World War II.
No, you have the Wilhelm too.
Right, but this is an article. Wait.
Oh, okay, okay.
This is an article. I put it in there because it's a good read, but it's a long read.
By the way, you told me that John Green's World War One. You have 3 cities, right?
3 cities?
Yeah, 3 of video for World War One.
I have, I think I have two videos and an article in the New Yorker.
Okay, no. My question is John Green's. He prepared 3 videos for World War One, right? Two. Okay.
Yeah. So this article, it's very interesting read. So if you're interested, the link to the article is in the presentation.
Okay. By the way, before closing, I have one question for you. I'm now writing Trump and Mexico Peña Nieto.
Right.
Why Trump try to have some heavy tariff of aluminum and steel to Mexico? Why he said Trump said, okay, we have 100 billion deficit against Mexico, so
right.
He tried to he tried to close down the NAFTA
right.
against Mexico. But
right.
what is his true reason why he is criticizing Mexico? Is this immigration? Or?
But no, I think that is so. The reason why they have this okay, so they created the NAFTA. The NAFTA made it possible for American companies to outsource their production into Mexico because labor is cheaper there. So basically, a lot of companies, they went across the border into Mexico, benefiting from cheaper labor, and Mexico not having to pay import duties because of the NAFTA agreement. So that means, in the thought of Trump, a lot of jobs were lost in the United States.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And the products, the hard materials, or the ones the assembled products, they would be imported back into the United States. Those are imports actually from American companies, not exports from Mexican companies. They are really just American companies. So the reason why Trump wants to end NAFTA, in my opinion, is that he wants to force American companies to bring production back to the States, and so bring their factories back into the States. By raising those import duties, Mexico becomes less attractive for American companies to outsource their production, and therefore put a stimulus on those American companies to bring their factories back into the States, generate jobs, and Trump can become the champion of the regular worker.
But this is
not so much about Mexicans, I think, but he cannot, basically he's waging war with his own industry, not so much with Mexicans. But I mean, that doesn't sell very well, so blaming the Mexicans is something that the underbelly of the American voter will find much more attractive than blaming GM and Ford for bringing their production into Mexico.
Yeah, this is the
Doesn't want
same
to-
phenomena 4 or 5 decades ago. Japanese company moving factory from Japan to the States. Is the same kind of issue Trump thinking?
Well, yeah. Well, actually, that's true. The parallel is absolutely true. Basically, by imposing those import restrictions in the United States on Japanese cars, Japan more or less voluntarily restricted their export. But in response, Japanese manufacturers went to the States to actually produce over there, thereby creating employment for the U.S. and actually making the Japanese car manufacturers much more profitable than they were before.
I think at that time is still AI robotics is not so much advanced yet, but now is very heavy IT technology is advanced. Even
Right.
if Ford and GM moving back from factory to America, they will not hire many people, American people.
Right. I 100% agree.
But why he's not stupid person. He understands that kind of background. How come he tried to move factory back to the States?
Yeah. Well, I
Just
think it was,
saying for the American white workers, just only saying that
right.
and making a promise that, but actually even if they don't generate increasing of the white labor in the States, but he just made a promise for those people. That's only he talking about that issue. Only talking.
Right. So, well, actually, what could happen in response is that factories indeed decide to bring their manufacturers indeed decides to bring their factories back into the States, but they will not build up the same kind of factory. They will actually look at AI, they will look at robotics, as you rightly say, and they will create factories that will actually generate not a lot of employment, because that employment will be done by machines.
But
Because it's cheap.
yeah. If so, why Trump is telling GM Ford ask them to bring back to the States their factory?
Well, because that is what he wants to boast to the people. He said, "I'm going to bring back work to the United States."
Only
That's
he
his political.
because only he
dividend.
made a promise for white people.
Yeah.
But actually nothing happened.
Actually, the position for them will not get better. I mean, it is a matter of efficiency. So if it becomes more expensive to produce overseas, then you need to bring back. But because the companies are like water, they always flow to the lowest point. So if it becomes more expensive to produce overseas, then you produce at home. But if at home it is cheaper to produce with machines and robots than it is with people, then they will produce with machines and people.
But let me, because I
machines.
I tell you about, I studied a lot about this issue, and currently, do you know the Tesla is fully automated factory in the States? Okay, fully automated. No workers.
Right.
For they making cars, no workers. So if GM Ford now bring back the factory to the States, they don't hire any white people. Maybe 100 or 200. That's it.
Yeah.
But still, Trump knows that, right?
Yeah, I assume he knows that. But what was it?
One more point is one more point why I surveyed. Even if American Ford GM are moving back their factory back to the States, their cost structure is completely the same as before, because no workers, fully automated, and the real estate cost is the same as Mexico, almost the same, because the lasted area, their real estate cost is almost free, right? So the Ford and GM have nothing get damaged. So okay, we can move back to the States, but no employee. And Trump knows that, but he still tried to keep his promise at the election.
Right.
Only that's it.
Right. He made a lot of brouhaha out of the bringing Foxconn to the United States. Do you remember we saw that video?
What's that?
I think Foxconn. I think Foxconn is going to produce flat screen televisions in. May
Oh yeah, in the States, right?
What?
Yeah. What's that? What is that?
Right.
Foxconn moving into the States, but no employee, right?
Well, there are going to be some employees, of course, but the fact is that for every job created, the American taxpayer is estimated to pay around $50,000 in tax breaks for every job created.
Wait a minute, they are company paying tax for company tax, right?
No, they get all kinds of tax breaks and benefits of
Tax break, yes, tax breaks.
Yeah. So it's estimated that actually the American worker is paying, for the American taxpayer, is for every job created, they actually need to pay Foxconn around $50,000 per worker.
Exactly. So, but this is actually no benefit for American people.
No, it's not. I don't think that creating like jobs like that is just like the deal that they made with Japan at the time to voluntarily restrict their export of cars to the United States. That actually made it so much more profitable because they started to create factories in the United States, and it actually cost the American taxpayers a lot of money.
Also, the American decided to tariff for the German car, 20% tariff, and the German cars, we want to decide to make a factory in the States because actually the Germany is just moving to the factory in the States. They have nothing different, and America just losing money. But still, why Trump try to do that?
Because he wants to show that, he's bringing all these companies to the United States. Basically, what he has been selling is that globalization is unfair competition because of wage differences, because of this, that, and the other. Countries are benefiting of the generosity of the United States. We can basically we don't, because of our trade agreements. It's very cheap. People can produce the products cheaply and then bring them to the United States. And on the other hand, we cannot export to those countries. We cannot export our products because there are tariffs, there are import duties. The reality is that is not true. I mean, the tariffs for American cars are exactly the same as the tariffs for German cars in Japan. American cars do not sell here. German cars sell very well. It's not because the tariffs. It's basically because American products have become uncompetitive. They are not of the same quality. They don't provide the same value. That issue is not being uttered by Trump because he would immediately get a lot of opposition in his own country. The fact of the matter is that America is not competitive anymore.
But if we consider thinking about this kind of sort of things, is very sort of kind of common sense. Trump knows that.
Right.
Trump should know that. He
will not say that the American industry is not competitive anymore. He will not say that the actual reason, not explain that basically it's the American industries that have moved their production to Mexico, and that's why we have a trade benefit. No, he says, well, basically, we allow cheap products to be produced in Mexico and then put into the market, and Mexico is not buying anything from us. It's not fair. That's what he's saying. But if you look at that argument, it's childish.
Yeah, but he's not kind of person his
well,
his brain is not so
that's
bad.
my conclusion. That he is that. Well, or the American people want to believe that.
Okay, just okay. We can decide he's supporting moron or idiot. Very easy to make criticize him, but actually he's still Republican.
No, he's not an idiot because actually he gets away with it and he gets support of the United States.
Yeah.
What I'm accusing is not, well, I'm accusing Trump also, but I think that people who actually believe that Mexico is has an unfair advantage over the United States because of NAFTA, that is a totally unfair argument. It's yes, Mexico is benefiting, but the reason is because the American industry are benefiting from the cheap labor in Mexico, and not because the Mexicans are using unfair trade practices and deliberately not importing from the United States.
So it
The
means
reason why from
okay.
the United States is that American products are not competitive.
It means Trump tried to telling a lie to their white collar workers, right?
Yes, blue collar work.
Blue collar workers, even if they try to bring back all factory, encourage Japanese, European car makers bring their factory moving to the States, but still blue collar workers employment no increase. But he knows that, but he tried to tell a lie for those people because it just keep lying for continue for next 2 or 3 years. So he just sustained his term of presidency. Is that right?
I believe it's my opinion that he will he definitely tries to bring back factories to the United States or bring more factories into the United States to create employment for workers. How much employment he really creates, I don't think he cares to look at it, or he's not that much interested into it. Basically, he wants to show results.
It means he tried to keep promise to blue collar workers at his election.
Right. This is his program, and this is what he is executing. That's what he promised, and that's what he does, which is very rare for a politician.
Oh, just exactly, he is a politician. Okay, he keep promise. Okay, I keep promise.
Right.
Right.
Which is
And
not like a politician,
yeah,
right?
the true goal is he said, okay, we're going to encourage you to hire blue collar people in the state, but actually nothing happened. He knows that,
Right.
but he tried, okay, we're going to invite factories to the state, but actually those companies didn't hire blue collar people, right?
What will happen is that a lot of people in Mexico and in other low-wage countries will lose their jobs.
Yeah, of course. That's the problem, right? That's called,
Yeah,
so
so
America wants to stop NAFTA. So this is a Trump reason. Okay, we don't need any more NAFTA. He just,
Right.
okay, he don't consider about American prosperity. American is whatever happened, but he just keep promise. His election promise.
Yeah, but he already, I mean, it's not like he made that promise 30 years ago and they couldn't foresee the effects of automation and artificial intelligence and all these things. Those things were already clear.
Yes, of course, but he knows that. So he knows that he cannot commitment for increase blue collar workers in the States. It's gone. Okay, manufacturing no more. So he knows that,
It
but
will
he
not
just
be
he keep
significant.
his promise.
Right,
He just only simply try to keep promise at his election.
right.
Okay, bring the factory back to Michigan, and also he building wall in the border of Mexico. Just keep promise, not
Right.
more than that. Is it correct?
Right, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. This is still I don't understand it because he's not moron. He can calculate. He's big business. He's doing with Russia, and he's keep very expert how to handle mafia in Russia. So he knows that how to do that, and so why he's doing how to abolish NAFTA, and that was my question. Actually, he tried to GM force them to back to the States, their factory, actually, okay?
Right.
And then ask the German car makers moving their factory to the States. But actually, this kind of sort of things, only moving factory, but no benefit for the States, right?
Right. Well, not the benefit that people believe that will give them. I actually even heard somewhere that even a company like Apple would consider to bring back production into the United States if their import duties are being levied on the products, on the Apple products, if they're being produced from China.
Also, Apple moving factories back to the United States.
Well,
what kind of benefit? America, they have benefit because they got a lot of income tax.
Right. I don't know whether this is actually happening, but I read somewhere that even Apple would consider to bring back manufacturing to the United States if needed. Because, if you're going to put a tariff on the products that are being produced in China, then what's the benefit of bringing products back into the United States? So that would actually that would not be negative towards bringing production back to the United States.
Okay, another
employment that will generate, I don't know.
Okay, time is up, but I have a last question. Okay, so American car makers more shift to China. Otherwise, American car maker need to pay more tariff to China. So 20% of tariff to China. So they will decide to moving the factory to China for selling those cars selling to China.
Right. I mean, that's a big market right there. So it would not be surprising if cars for the Chinese market will be produced in China, cars for the American market will be produced in America, cars for the European market will be produced in Europe, in order to avoid these tariffs. So that means that basically where we had a centralization of production, we are going to decentralize this production and create factories everywhere in order to avoid these trade barriers. So you can very easily see that these trade barriers are going to create inefficiencies in production, and it's going to hurt the global economy as a whole because of that.
It does make sense. This is Trump's strategy. We want to sell the car in China, so Trump agreed. Okay, you are GM Ford moving factory in China.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay. Time is up. Okay, thank you very much. So I wanted to discuss with you about this issue.
Okay.
Okay, today.
On Saturday we're going to continue with World War II, and then we're going to move to the aftermath of World War II. Then we will look at the 60s, Marshall Plan, Cold War, and the 1960s. And then we're going to move to Confucianism versus Western philosophy.
But it takes more time, Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for today.
All right. Thank you, Takashi-san, for joining.
Takashi still in